Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira Cohen, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So hello everyone. Today we are joined by Lauren Mason. So she's a certified IOIT and she specializes in the reproductive health. She's also a yoga educator. So it's nice to meet another educator. She specializes in prenatal and postpartum, as well as pregnancy and infant loss. All right, so tell us about your story. And maybe first of all, for me, I still have to learn this. Thank you for being here. I'm really grateful, and it's lovely to get to know you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's always nice to share. So I started teaching yoga in 2012. That's when I got my 200-hour certification.
But can we go back? Can we go
further?
Back? When did you discover yoga, and what did it do that you just continued on that journey?
Oh, yeah. So I started practicing yoga when I was 15 because I had a ballet teacher who introduced sun salutations into our ballet classes. He had been with the Joffrey Ballet, and I don't know where he had learned yoga, but so I loved it because it was a whole different way of moving the body and a whole different way of thinking about the body. In dance, you're trying to just be perfect and get technique and make your body look like somebody else wants your body to look. And in yoga, you're just feeling into how you feel and feeling into like what your body can do. And that was just revolutionary for me as a teenager who was feeling really body insecure and feeling I'm nearly 6 feet tall, and I was nearly 6 feet tall already by the time I was 15. So I was already in that place where I was realizing that professional dance was not something that was really available to me, especially not ballet. So I was feeling a lot of insecurity and a lot of, dislike for my body because it was so, giraffe-like that I couldn't do the thing that I loved. So I kind of drifted away from ballet, but I kept doing like theater. Theater was something I really loved, musical theater, singing and dancing and that kind of thing. And I continued to practice yoga with, just like DVDs, and YouTube was like barely a thing then, but people were already on YouTube teaching yoga.
Really?
Sadie Nardini was a vinyasa teacher. I started doing her videos really early on, like the early 2000s.
Oh, it's that long that she's been doing that. Okay.
Yeah. You can't see her videos anymore because now she has taken down all of her old videos, but I used to do her videos with her, really far back in the day. And I did that up until I went to college, and I just went to the University of Texas, which was only about an hour from where I had grown up. But I was living on my own and didn't really have much of a community, and doing yoga practices at my school was one of the things that kind of helped me to stay connected to people and helped me to stay healthy, because I was still doing, I was walking all over campus 5 or 6 miles a day and going to a couple of dance classes a day. Like I was really, really physically active. But again, yoga gave me that opportunity to just feel into my body instead of expecting my body to perform. And also it started at that point to really benefit my mental and emotional health, because I was feeling lonely and simultaneously really bored, but also really challenged. Like the freshman year of college for everyone is kind of a weird transition, kind of learning who you are without people telling you what to do.
Yeah, but also the hormones. I think it's a combination of many things going on.
Yes. Yeah. And I had gone from being, you're a high school student who was in class for like 8 hours a day and then going to dance or musical practices for like 4 hours a day after school, to being like, I had, one class a day. And I'm like, what do I do with myself?
Yeah. I can imagine.
So yeah. And then I joined a show choir. So I was doing, singing and dancing and yoga. And like, I would literally go to work at 4:30 in the morning because I worked at a pool where people started swimming at 5 a.m. And I would go from class until 8 until about noon. And then I would go to yoga at 2 o'clock. And then I would keep going to rehearsal until 10 o'clock some days. So I was having these just like massively long days. And I was doing Ashtanga yoga at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was so energizing and refreshing and mentally healthy for me to spend that time for myself. And then I got a job at a yoga studio, right before I graduated college. And that's where I did all of my training. Was a place called Yoga in Austin that sadly no longer exists. There were some bad decisions made, and the company is just no longer in existence. But I did all of my training from my very first 200-hour all the way through yoga therapy with them. Wow. I was really fortunate to work for them and get an employee discount and get work trade and all kinds of things to make my training more affordable, because I did start, when I was a broke student.
It's good to have those breaks. The last podcast guest, Jill Manos, we also talked about this. She also had a teacher who let her come for free, and that helped. And I had the same for 2 years. My teacher in Berlin, Manuela, was doing the same for me. I just wanted to come back to your emotional and mental health, because that's very interesting for me always. What do you think it is about yoga, in your experience and understanding, that helps us to feel more well emotionally and mentally?
Yeah. For me, especially early on in that journey, I was raised as like an evangelical Christian. I was told that I needed to, read my Bible every morning and pray every morning and do all this stuff to study the word. And, and it just really, none of it like really resonated with me. I knew that my mother did that for her mental and emotional grounding, like having that time of spiritual practice was so useful to her, but it never really resonated with me. And I was able to find that with yoga, because it was a time when I was able to just focus on myself. Yeah. So it was good for me to just have that time with myself where I could have a positive body experience. I could be grateful for what my body could do, but also, practicing asana when I was a teenager, that was the most meditative I'd ever been, where I'm just moving and breathing and not trying to analyze or be logical about things. So I was that student who needed to do 45 minutes of asana before I could even consider like 3 minutes of shavasana to just like sit with myself. So for me, it was providing the structure to actually do my introspection and self-care. That was one of the first times I'd ever experienced that. And that's what I continue to experience, is that it provides structure for a lot of people to do the things that they know they're supposed to be doing. You hear like, you need to sit down and do your mindfulness meditation. Like, I'm just supposed to sit there. I'm just supposed to sit and think about my mind. Like, I hate my mind. My mind is so uncomfortable. Why would I sit down on purpose and just sit with myself? So I love that movement and breathing and chanting. I fell in love with all of those things because they provided this space for me to do the work I knew I was supposed to be doing, but I hadn't found a way to really do before. I also love chanting as a singer. Sorry, what?
It's like a pathway. It's like what you do for children, babies, when they can't go to bed. You create this ritual, so slowly you prepare them to that part where the difficult part. And it's the same for lots of busy people. We're so programmed to be on mentally that we can't just sit with our mind because it's going at 100K an hour.
Right. And that because when I really got dedicated to my yoga practice was when I was a student, and I was literally working sometimes 20 hours a day. And so having that like hour or hour and a half of yoga in the middle and telling myself it was for my physical health, like it gave me permission to take care of myself instead of just trying to accomplish. Well,
it's still, I think that's why it's acceptable to strong workers, especially the Ashtanga practice, because it's still very goal orientated. And so it's a good, what do you call that, segue or intersection for people to come onto the more slow practices.
Absolutely. I sometimes even will say people like, the 8 limbs of yoga. I feel like that's somehow the journey that people take in their yoga life, where
and they practice on a daily level too. You could use it as steps.
Yeah. And I definitely have seen it in our city. There is a lot of conservatism here from the military and also from the Catholic population. So there's been a lot more acceptance of the physical practice of yoga. That was what was safe for us to offer kind of in our community for the longest time. And I've lived here now for almost 10 years, and I've seen a definite shift where now there is more like sound bath or meditation. There's a lot more subtle type practices that are offered completely by themselves, which would have been unheard of when I moved here just 9 years ago.
Oh, really?
And so I can see it in the community too, which is so interesting.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of the way it is in most Western cultures. We're so physical and material that we only allow ourselves to accept something that might be spiritual if it's a body practice, if it's something we can tick off our list that we did that was good for us, that we had a goal. Yeah.
And I've seen some resistance, among the atheist community or among the previously Christian community, that they are really averse to anything that looks spiritual because they've been kind of hurt by the religiosity around them. So they will they'll go into a spiritual practice. It's acceptable if it also includes stretching.
It's a word they know.
Yes.
It's a thing that's safe and it's okay. Yeah, there's no religion attached to it.
Right.
I've noticed that too. There was a moment at school, I teach at school with kids as well, where you weren't allowed to say anything that was Sanskrit or do any sounds that might, or even any gestures which might look religious. Now that's kind of watered down again, so that's nice. But we still got to break into a lot of places, I think. So let's anyway go into how did it become yoga therapy for you?
So from literally my first day in my 200-hour training, I sat in there and I looked at my teacher, who I'd already known because I was working at the studio for a few months before I started my training. So I'd known this teacher and I had taken several classes with her and just thought that she was so cool and so cute. And so when I sat down on my first, her name is Libby Cox. She currently is in Eugene, Oregon. And I think her studio is something like Two Birds Yoga or something like that. And I connected with her again recently, and I was just so honored by her because she, I was being deferential to her as my teacher. I was getting her mentorship for a training I was offering. And she was so deferential to the additional training and experience that I had as a yoga therapist, while at the same time being so knowledgeable about what she knows. So she studied with Douglas Brooks, who is a tantric and Sanskrit scholar.
Okay.
And so I got a lot of tantric influence from her and from various other teachers, a very, community and feminine and mythology focused kind of approach to yoga.
Yummy.
But I love it. I also, a lot of people at our school had also studied with Gary Kraftsow or with Leslie Kaminoff, those classic Desi Kachar students. So we had a strong Desi Kachar kind of Vinny yoga chikitsa, yoga therapy influence in the whole school. And also quite a few people who had studied with David Swenson and other Ashtanga teachers. And then also there was a huge Kundalini influence at the school. So there was this whole kind of melding of different schools of yoga and all very specific in their lineages, but also willing to bring in all the pieces and have them work together, which I thought was really cool. And that's how I continue to teach and practice today. But yeah, I sat down in my first day of my 200 hour and I just thought Libby was so cool. And I was like, I want to be her.
That's a good teacher.
Yes.
When you think that, yeah.
And we had a fairly similar background. So I went to undergrad and I have a degree in English with a certification to teach in secondary school. Mm-hmm. And then I have a degree in theater management. So I had kind of gone in to do performance, and that was not really something that my school was really great at. And so I went into technical theater because I was able to learn stage management and, set design and lighting design and all the actual like business management side of things, which I thought was really fascinating. And then my family are all teachers. And so I was just like, I'm going to go do this teaching thing because I find it interesting. I'll probably homeschool my kids whenever I grow up. And, maybe I can fall back on teaching if I don't want to do anything else. So I was just so achievement oriented. I couldn't pick one thing. I was like, I'll just do all the things. But it's ended up serving me well from what I do now. And I'll talk about that later. But Libby had a background in education and in art. So we had kind of a similar background of having training in education, which, she and I talked about right from the start. And it's still true to this day that there are tons of people who think that if they're good at yoga, they are good at teaching yoga, that they can be good at teaching teachers yoga. It's really, it's like
a totally different ball game.
It's a totally different thing. It's
Can
like
I
the same.
Say something. It's like I was practicing yoga for, I think it was almost 20 years when my teacher asked me to start teaching her classes. And I just didn't feel ready because teaching is a totally different ball game already, let alone teaching teachers. That is so different. There's so many layers, and you have to first understand dynamics in a room and how you can hold the space, but still, like we spoke with Leslie Kaminoff, have this kind of responsibility to create the right dynamics and also situation for people to feel that they can speak or that they can learn and ask questions, but at the same time that you're still holding this kind of I'm the mentor space without being too dominant. And that's really difficult. You don't just do that because you're good at yoga.
Right.
It's so different.
Yeah. And the whole basic curriculum and lesson planning organization is something that it boggles my mind still that people don't think they need to know that. Like you need to have a plan. You need to come in with the things that you're going to teach people, and you need to follow the plan because it's really irritating to students.
You mean as a teacher for teachers?
As a teacher, training teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, because
not normal classes. No.
Yeah. Or for even, like a workshop or something, if you promise people that they're going to learn certain things and then in the moment you decide to just go off and talk about whatever you want, then they didn't get what they signed up for.
No.
And so
is there a lot of this? Is there a lot of this happening? I can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it might be just because the yoga culture here is so young. There are just a lot of people that I've seen, locally who will try to put on a training and they don't have a solid curriculum, or I have heard of quite a few people who are like, oh, well, I don't really do a plan. I just kind of say whatever comes to me. Or people have been to a training where they didn't learn sequencing, or they didn't learn class planning. They didn't learn really really stuff that supposedly their school was supposed to cover underneath their Yoga Alliance approved status. And when I talked to them a little bit more, they're like, oh yeah, well, we ended up doing just a ton of yoga practice, or we ended up talking about philosophy for a lot longer, or the person just didn't follow what they planned. So the students end up being completely unprepared to teach. Because
I think a big issue is also just the constrictions of time. I mean, 200 hours, you can't cover very much in 200 hours. We had 25 hours on anatomy, 25 on philosophy, 25. And then, you have all these aspects of yoga by itself. And then there's the body, which is just so intricate. And then you have the mind, and you have physiology, which we didn't even touch on. There's just all these aspects, which I think to be a yoga teacher, you should have at least 100 hours for each thing, really, if we're gonna talk in hours. But I think it's even better that we go back to how it used to be. Like my teacher, she didn't let me just start teaching. She wanted to see that I'd been with her for at least 5 years before she asked me to even start teaching. And that makes such a difference.
Right. So yeah, we were having those conversations right from the beginning, Libby and I, around like, what is a good yoga education? And that's something that she even, would talk about, like, your 200 hour is very basic. And this is meant to be for group yoga classes. So like general yoga classes that are not for people who are injured or need adaptation in any way. This is for basically young, healthy people. Because I was doing a Hatha flow vinyasa style training. And we talked about sequencing. We talked about putting classes together. We talked about doing modifications to a certain extent. And we talked about like contraindications to a certain extent. But yeah, kind of from the start, I had the understanding that 200 hour was very basic. If you wanted to like teach yoga at a gym, if you wanted to teach really generic sequences and not work even with private clients at all. And then, if you got your 500 hour, you could maybe work with private clients or start to specialize in some way. And yoga therapy wasn't like a designation at that time. What they would just encourage you to do is like, well, you need to do your 500 hour here, and then you need to do a 300 hour with these people, and you need to go and do multiple trainings with multiple people if you're going to want to specialize, and maybe even get a mentor and work personally with them. And yeah, like you said, kind of be trained to do more specialized work. So I knew from the beginning I wanted to be a teacher trainer. And then I also knew that I wanted to be a prenatal specialist, which I had no real reason why. I was interested in having my own children, but I hadn't been pregnant. I was not married. I was nowhere close to having my own babies. I just, for some reason, was fascinated by the whole thing. Yeah. And I've continued through my career to be interested in caring for caregivers. So caring for parents, caring for therapists, caring for other yoga teachers. So that's where there's some crossover for me, is that I knew I wanted to train and support yoga teachers, and I knew I wanted to train and support parents. So I did that first vinyasa training, and I got feedback during my practicum. You do your little final teaching segment, and we had 3 people observing, 2 of which went on to be yoga therapists, one who has her doctorate in kinesiology and biomechanics, that kind of thing. They both told me like, hey, you're a really good like Hatha teacher. You're really good at breaking things down and explaining things for people, and, really taking your time with the anatomy and understanding the body. And so that, along with the interest in prenatal, really set me off on a more therapeutic, kind of specialized path, because I knew that I liked taking things slow.
Yeah. And I think it has something to do also with your dancing background and being more aware of the body and the complications, but also the beauty of it if you understand it well, and how you can help people much better through that.
Yes. And it was also kind of the beginning of me understanding that what I would enjoy from my personal practice can be different than what I enjoy teaching. So I enjoy the flow aspect of things because of my dance background. It's very easy for me to understand how postures flow together and enjoy different cool transitions. All of that is very interesting for me physically and mentally, and I enjoy that kind of movement. But that's not necessarily what I always enjoy teaching.
Interesting.
So,
interesting. Yeah. I'm trying to find that in my own practice, because lately I used to be very Iyengar based and all the details, and then I went more into vinyasa, and then I started to go back into Ashtanga. So I've done all the different practices, and now I just mix it all up. But the last year or so, I really feel I need to dance within the yoga practice, like bring something totally different into it and see how it can be more flowing and free without actually going into a pose at all. And just Yeah, but do I want to teach this is always the question. Do I want to take it into the class? Is this what people need at this moment or not? And how safe is it for the body for these different people? That's always a question we should be asking.
Right. Yeah. So they fortunately like had faith in me at my studio, and they put me on a fast track to start doing teacher training. So I sat in and observed at least 2 full 200-hour trainings. I sat observing for at least 100 hours of each of those.
Wow.
And then I started doing small lectures on kind of the things that I was most comfortable and familiar with, and kind of, being observed and mentored by a teacher that way. And then, right from the very beginning, also, I started teaching beginner series at our studio, which I found to be so useful. I think that every single new teacher should teach beginners in like a workshop format, because they just ask such useful questions. And it's so useful to have a discussion with someone who is experiencing yoga for the first time when you have been, so familiar with it for so long. It just helps you to see it with fresh eyes. And that was my first also kind of foray into educating rather than just guiding practices, guiding a vinyasa where I just sit there and talk the whole time and just tell people what to do. More of an interactive, educational type format.
I
so
love
that's one.
I love educating. I notice I educate all the time, and it's frustrating if I'm not in the right environment.
Yes. Yeah, I've had to learn. A big part of my journey is learning about how less is more in my group yoga classes, and learning how I can help people make discoveries about themselves without telling them what they need to discover. Has been an interesting kind of thing to kind of sit in the background and ask people to explore and ask people to listen to themselves, and then see what they learn, rather than coming up and being like, we're going to talk about compassion today, and I'm going to tell you how to find compassion in your body. Instead, what would it be like if you treated your knees with compassion?
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing about education. It's asking questions. It's not so much telling or instructing or revealing or showing. It's asking a question about what are you experiencing in your body? How can you feel that you're creating more integrity? How can we lift up towards the heart? How can we create space in this joint? Which part of your body is not aiding the rest of the body? And all these little things that you can ask people. Yeah. That makes them the teacher of their own experience.
Absolutely. Which is, kind of jumping ahead, how I feel like a lot of my work is as a yoga therapist. It's not necessarily that I have better intuition or wisdom than anyone else who doesn't have this full IAYT certification. It's that I have more subtle ways to get people to learn how to heal themselves. And I just know more movements and more breathing and more Ayurveda than a teacher who doesn't have the training that I have. And it just helps me to, dive deeper into what might be going on in someone's system, and then giving them the most effective or most subtle way to kind of get to the heart of the issue.
It's like being specific. You have a big toolbox, and therefore, like you just said, less is more. You don't need to give them 20 things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes it's just one simple thing.
Right. So I was really comfortable early on in teaching teacher training, because I had my training in lesson planning and pedagogy. Like, I knew how to create and deliver a plan. I knew how to guide discussion to a certain extent. I knew how to, ask leading questions that would lead to discovery. Like, all those things were a part of my education training, which I think should be essential for teacher trainers, because it's so much different than teaching yoga. So I was really comfortable with that kind of side of it. But then I started to discover that more and more students were needing mentorship. More and more discussions were like, people were coming to training basically for like group therapy or for like yoga therapy. Like, they were coming into their 200-hour training partly because they wanted to be a yoga teacher, but partly because they wanted time dedicated to themselves to improve their own journey and learn about the philosophy and the anatomy and everything that could help their own practice. And so pretty early on, I started realizing that I wanted more kind of training, and it just, my school was developing their. So what really encouraged me to go and pursue yoga therapy training was, well, first of all, my school was developing their yoga therapy program, kind of working with, some of my teachers were in communication with Gary Kraftsow and with Leslie Kaminoff, and like the people who were working on creating the IAYT standards. So they had a little bit of insight into what those standards might be. And they were already trying to adapt all of the training programs, but especially what would become their yoga therapy program to fit the standards so that they could be approved as an IAYT school as soon as possible. Oh, wow. So I kind of knew that that was in the works, and just based on my experience of needing more skills to mentor teachers as they were going through teacher training, I just knew that I needed more skills to be a better teacher trainer. So that was really my first kind of motivation into yoga therapy.
You knew exactly what you were doing. You right? Just kept studying and studying. You're like, I'm on this track. That's really good.
Right. My Ayurvedic constitution is Pitta Kapha. So I have that combination of being like extremely driven, but also with like a steadfast dedication.
Endurance. Yeah, but endurance, that's the thing.
Yes. And yes, so
I just wanted to ask something. Sure. What do you think is really important, if there's yoga teachers listening, that they should know about becoming a teacher of teachers? What are things that you really think and are essential to know or to learn?
Well, I don't want to I'm not using this just as an opportunity to plug, but I actually developed a course on becoming a teacher trainer that kind of outlines all these things. But having a good understanding of how to deliver curriculum, so how to have learning objectives that you then meet in the day. So this is hugely important for a 200-hour training. What I saw even at my school for people who didn't have the training, they would come in for maybe like 4 to 6 hours of the 200-hour training, and they had topics that they were supposed to cover. And if they didn't cover them in the right way, that if they come into a day and they don't deliver what the students were promised, that means that the curriculum isn't being delivered, which means that the school is then like out of its approval for Yoga Alliance. Wow. And it also means that the students are not prepared for their exam or their teaching practicum or for teaching. And if that happens with maybe 2 hours, because one teacher messes up one lesson, it's no big deal. But if it's 5 teachers over the course of the training, or if it's one teacher who's responsible for like 50 hours, then that has a huge impact. Like there needs to be teamwork and communication and an understanding that you're fitting into a bigger curriculum. You're not allowed to just come in and teach whatever you want on that day. But that's also true when you're leading the training alone. So like we kind of talked about earlier, there are some people who, they lead a training alone, and supposedly they're hitting all of these educational timelines, and supposedly they're hitting all these learning objectives. But then their students get to the end of the training and they're like, I don't think we ever talked about A, B, or C, because we ended up spending so much time answering so-and-so's question or working on so-and-so's shoulder. This is what has happened in several trainings that I've heard of that are led by therapeutic, compassionate teacher trainers. They end up teaching the people in the room, but they're basically doing like yoga therapy for the people in the room instead of remembering that their key objective is preparing people to teach yoga. So students come out of it thinking like they maybe got some really nice personal attention, and yet they're not able to create a yoga sequence.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but that's a good point. It's important to think about that, and how do we plan that? Because I was just thinking, oh yes, because I did a 1-year training, well, not training, what was it? I call it the yoga teachers class, and it was more mentorship on emotions, psych, shadows. And yeah, I did have an outline, and I made sure to prepare myself. And it's hard to kind of keep the flow going in the direction you want to keep going when there are those personal things coming up from the participants. But at the same time, yeah, that is your responsibility, like we were saying before.
And the personal experience, it does, like that's what's so wonderful about having a live training or an in-person training. Like you do want that personal application and discussion. And that's what's kind of hard about holding space as a teacher trainer, is that you want to welcome that without making the entire class about that.
Yeah. No, but that's why you should have, I think, an idea. Okay, we have 30 minutes here and 10 minutes there to talk about it, quick answer questions, and you stem people. You say, okay, now we got to end, let's move on, or make sure that everyone has a turn asking something.
Exactly. Yeah, so those are kind of the big ones. And then also just like your own personal organization and your own personal preparation. And I think a lot of people are unprepared for how much space holding you do have to do, how much you have to listen to everyone's issues and like address all of those issues, how much you have to have so many more boundaries as a teacher trainer than you have to have as a yoga teacher. And one thing I talked about in that training too, that I talked about with Libby a lot, is that, you know, with more money and more responsibility, there is more opportunity to compromise ethically, which is why we see so many master teachers falling into traps, unhappy or bad places, because you have this idea like, I want to serve people, so it's okay if I do this. My ultimate goal is good, so it's okay if I compromise on these areas. And so I've seen quite a few people that I know, but also, you know, nationally and internationally, big yoga teachers who, because they think that their intentions or their goals are good, they're willing to compromise on seemingly small ethical things that actually become really big deals, because they think that their students are more important, or what they have to share is more important, or whatever the case may be.
Is this not more also a kind of question of scope of practice then? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. That we keep that in mind and be clear, have that intention before entering that space. What are we doing here? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Which is also, we haven't talked much about my prenatal journey, but like, again, I was studying pregnancy and doing prenatal yoga all through the years where I was studying yoga therapy, and I was working one-on-one with clients for fertility and pregnancy and postpartum. And I was teaching prenatal yoga classes. And I got pregnant and had a baby in the middle of that. I was teaching, I taught two, hey, shush.
That's the baby. She's quite big.
If you're gonna be noisy, you have to leave. Hush. I taught 2 prenatal yoga teacher trainings, one before I had my baby, one while I was pregnant with my baby. And again, kind of similar things where there is more kind of gray area when you're teaching a specialty like prenatal, because there are some therapeutic aspects to it, even though we're not really supposed to say that, because you're doing things to address. You're doing things to address specific things that are coming up as a result of the pregnancy.
Do you want me to pause just for a moment?
Let's pause just for a moment.
Yeah, no problem.
There are some kind of adaptive therapeutic aspects to teaching prenatal, because there are concerns that come up during pregnancy that are related to the pregnancy, that we have yoga tools or Ayurvedic tools, you know, lifestyle things we can do to help those things out. So we're able to do a little bit of that support without, you know, going into a yoga therapy realm, just because we know the condition that the students are in. We know what's happening physiologically in their body, even though, of course, each experience is unique. We're able to address those things kind of with our yoga toolbox. So I had already been kind of exploring that as a prenatal yoga teacher. And so also kind of going into therapy and specializing in prenatal yoga therapy was kind of a smooth transition. And then that led me to working with sexual trauma and working with pregnancy and infant loss. I had been kind of navigating my own way and using what I'd learned in my yoga therapy training to help clients who had a less than smooth fertility, pregnancy, or postpartum experience. And I fortunately was able to connect with a fellow yoga therapy student at my school. So we became yoga therapists in the same training group, and we graduated literally the same month, or like maybe a couple weeks after the school dissolved. So the school went out of business, and we all kind of scrambled to finish our yoga therapy certification. My partner is Angela Moore.
Oh, I saw her on your website. Oh, wow, that's so nice.
Yeah. So she had already approached me about wanting to do a 200-hour training at her school, and I couldn't because I was teaching 200-hour and working for my school at the time, so I couldn't do both. And but then the school kind of dissolved, so we both became yoga therapists, and then we started our school actually really quickly because I had a few students who they were like halfway through their training that they'd all already paid for, and we kind of scrambled to get our school certified with Yoga Alliance so that we could certify them. And then we started our own 200-hour training program. And this was all in like the summer and fall of 2019.
Wow.
And in February of 2020, we hosted our first 300-hour training course, which was actually holding space for pregnancy and infant loss, because that is one of Angela's sister, Camille Hawkins. She is I want to say owner, organizer of the Birth, Breath, and Death Institute. She's a counselor who specializes in pregnancy and infant loss. And so she'd been doing this training for, caregivers and professionals about how you can support people through pregnancy and infant loss. And I was really happy to have that opportunity because I'd been, holding space in that way for those kinds of clients for years without any specialized training in it. So we were happy to kind of have that very difficult topic, but very needed kind of topic. So through Angela and her sister, I did more trauma training. And so now I don't meet with...
you don't want to stop with the trainings, do you?
I don't. I really don't. I think that was actually the last formal training I did was in the beginning of 2020. And now I just do little things to maintain my IOIT certification. And I'm leading 200-hour and 300-hour trainings myself. So I'm doing all this kind of self-study to prepare for those. I love learning. I love learning.
Yes,
I can't stop.
Me too. I'm a lifelong learner. I just have a question about reproductive health. So it's really important. And I think a lot of people don't understand how important it is, especially for women. Physiologically, the effects of, even if the tissues and the organs are not optimally healthy and congruent, the effects it can have mentally, emotionally, energetically. Can we kind of dive into that just for people to understand the impact?
Yeah. So I'm actually leading now my third prenatal training. It's our first one underneath our school, the Unbound Collective. And I have been collaborating with this one with an OBGYN and with another yoga therapist colleague of mine who has a lot of Ayurvedic experience because she's from Chennai. So she like Ayurveda is just part of her culture and her life. So we've been talking a lot in that training about how your reproductive health is a huge indicator of your overall health. Because it is a low priority for your body. It is not something that is necessary for your survival. It's something that is necessary for, reproduction.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Ayurvedically looking, and I think it is that in physiology, it's the end result of distillation of the intake of food that you have.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So if all your other systems are not working optimally, you're going to see it show up in your reproductive system because it's being malnourished energetically or physically. Or if you're in a, constant state of stress, like many modern people are, your reproductive system is going to suffer. You're going to have, difficult menstrual problems. You're going to have a difficult menopause transition. You're going to have difficulty conceiving.
Yeah.
Right. All those things. And so, one of the things I was so gratified to connect with this OBGYN, who is a very holistic, pragmatic kind of approach, because we were all talking about together, but she also mentioned, like, we treat so many things as normal in our reproductive health that are not normal. Like, you're not supposed to have painful menstruation.
Yeah. Or PMS.
In Ayurveda as well.
Yeah. It's a sign that there's already something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's part of kind of my, I had worked with pregnancy because, you can get a prenatal training, but being able to get a reproductive health training is something like now you see more and more of it, but it was not really common before. And it's just, something that people don't want to talk about. Like menstruation,
there's a lot of shame attached to it. Yeah.
Or, it's very private. It's embarrassing. It's yucky. Right. Those kinds of things.
Yucky, but okay. It's juicy.
Right.
Right. Turn it around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important. And like, also sexual health and how that helps, feeds into your relationships and all of those things. So I've kind of delved into all of those and worked with various clients and done little workshops or done little classes here and there. It was difficult for a while for me to do prenatal only classes because there just wasn't a high enough pregnancy population willing to drive to whichever studio I was working in. So I ended up doing a lot of general reproductive health or like gentle prenatal friendly classes. And I was getting tons of women and sometimes men even who were coming in and they weren't pregnant, but they were really benefiting from the pelvic centered practices and the relaxation centered practices and doing a lot. We do, like you were talking about, that dancing kind of movement. We do a lot of like somatic exploratory movement. Which is really great for preparing for labor, but it's also a really great way to just like feel how your body connects together and just move for the sake of moving.
And enjoyment and to have pleasure, because I think that's another issue of infertility and other reproductive imbalances. It's just we're stiff in an area that should be flowing and soft and fluid. And so the life can't manifest there or plant itself in something that's rigid and dry. And
absolutely. Yeah. And just that's been a whole theme really in my yoga journey around like finding the pleasure, finding the enjoyment. It's not about what I can accomplish or what I can do. It's not about the end result. It's about enjoying how I feel in this moment and appreciating what my body can do now.
Wonderful. I'm glad you're doing this. It's so needed. And so there's a lot of interest in it. You notice that people are aware that this is an issue?
Yes, it's growing. I mean, everything that we do lately is really small because, again, we started our advanced training program. We started our 200-hour in 2019. We were going to start our advanced training in 2020. And the studio where we're located locally is very small. It's in a very small town. We only have, like maybe 100 students in our whole like pool of students. So, but we've been okay with it for a while as we're growing and as we're learning, and our students are getting a lot of intimate attention. So we have training groups that are maybe only, 5 to 8 people. That's so right now I have 6 in my prenatal training, which is 6 more prenatal teachers than existed last year. So it's a little like incremental progress, but we're also working on, we're recording everything to create virtual courses. This is another thing where like my education training and also my, education stuck-upness. I just hate all these virtual courses that are coming out that are low quality and unedited, and they don't have thoughtful lesson plans. It's like, let's just put up a camera in the corner of our yoga training and act like recording an in-person training is good enough to be a virtual training. Like, so we're working really hard to make
that was definitely a stuck-upness.
Yeah, I know. Well, because it irritates me. Like I've taken some
Yeah.
virtual trainings. I did some virtual education in college, and then I've done some virtual training for my yoga training. And like, it's just not, if it's not a thoughtful experience for the student, if you're not thinking about like this person sitting in their computer experiencing this, they're not actually in the room. So like, think about how they're receiving the content that you're delivering.
Yes.
It's a totally different learning experience.
Yeah. And people just don't learn, I think, because you're so irritated that it's bad quality, nothing actually comes in.
Right.
Yeah.
And I try to get over it. Just like, you know, as a experienced yoga teacher, you go into like a yoga class and you're like, oh, I can tell you're a new teacher. I'm going to enjoy it anyway. I'm going to have my own practice. I'm going to do what I can to like, you know, make it enjoyable. I'm going to listen. Yes. So I try to do the same thing whenever I do continuing education for myself. I'm going to look past the things that could be better about this and try to learn what I need to learn.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, so it's an all an interesting journey, but yeah, this is what I knew I wanted to do from very early on in my yoga career. So I'm happy that I'm able to
do that. You've manifested it. And I think that's no point. As I'm listening to you speak, it's like, oh, okay, because you've been so directed on your path and you knew already from the beginning, 2015, that was what you were doing. It's become very solid, whereas I've been trying a bit of this and trying a bit of that. Like in my yoga therapy, it's very clear. It's mental, emotional health. Since a child, I've watched people close by struggling with that area of their life, so it's always been an interest. But with the rest, with the teaching, it's always been, oh, I like to teach kids and I love to teach people who have functional issues. I love to educate, and it's become this like smorgasbord of things, and it's not sending a focused message of what I do. I wanted to ask one last thing, like when we are teaching as teachers or as yoga therapists, what do you think is an important thing to remember when we're working with this reproductive area? What do we need to be careful about when we're thinking about trauma and abuse of this area? What is a good guideline?
So I think a lot of what we, you know, I'm very relaxation focused. I'm very much in the, like, we need to maintain deep rest and recovery so our body can come into healing. And, you know, some people are afraid to let go and release control. So that's one thing to consider, is that, you know, if you have PTSD or you just have, you know, trauma in your body, the idea of relaxing your guard is something that is dangerous. If that's something that maybe you did before and you got hurt. So creating a really safe environment where people can, just like we kind of talked about earlier, kind of like luring yourself into the experience you need to have, very much needs to happen in any kind of, you know, even if you have people, if you're going to be working on like the pelvic floor, that's still a private, weird area, even for people who haven't experienced trauma in that space. So I like to work a lot with the breath and, you know, just start with feeling your body moving, and then maybe start to explore how the pelvic floor is moving. And then a lot of validation. And all the time I'm teaching that, like, this might be uncomfortable, this might be weird. And like, that's a common experience. It's okay if it doesn't feel, it's okay if it's numb. It's okay if you can't feel down there at all, because that is also a really common experience. So again, like we've talked about, all that invitation to experience and the validation that any experience is an experience. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. Yeah. And then like we were talking about too, a lot of that fluid releasing type movement around the pelvis, around the hips, around the pelvic floor, the low back. This is one of the areas where like the chakra system doesn't really resonate with me too much. But when talking about the second chakra and its element being water,
then it does.
This really resonates with me. Like, I love to bring in water visualization and the feeling of water and the feeling of fluidity and the feeling of flow. That just resonates so well with me.
Yeah, because life, even if you think about it, life first started in water, whether you're looking at the earth or in our bodies, it's the water element. It's so fascinating. I love that.
Absolutely. And also the idea of kind of energy flowing through that area. So
Mm.
I learned years and years ago, like anatomically, the center of your body is your pelvis. That's where the
Mm.
spine meets the legs.
Mhm.
So all the energy from walking and moving on your legs goes up through the pelvis to the spine. All the
Mhm.
energy of gravity comes down the spine into the pelvis. And
Mm.
so it's really common for there to be imbalances due to just the way that you walk or the way that you move. And it's
Mm.
also really common for tension to come there, even if it's not, trauma related or sexual related. There's just a lot going on right there. It's like the crossroads of your entire body.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
working on those kind of imbalances, and again, bringing some fluidity and maybe acceptance, but also just experiencing into it, feeling into it, I find really useful. So most of my classes, even if they're not, quote unquote, reproductive health or pregnancy classes, I do a lot of hip circling and pelvic
Mhm.
tilting and, hip swaying and all that stuff, just to help bring a little awareness into how that area doesn't need to be rigid. Because in
Yeah.
a lot of our yoga practice, we're doing a lot to support the pelvis, or maybe like people are trying to super stretch into the hips when really what they need is maybe not like a deep
Keep them
pigeon held for
square.
25 minutes,
Yeah.
but like circle your hips a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to lead us into a practice of that? Just a very
Sure.
short practice, yeah?
Absolutely. So can you please go stand over there? I'm going to do some yoga. You want to do some yoga with us?
I'll
Okay.
mute myself.
Okay. All right. So we'll just do a little bit of free movement and then a little bit of breathing. So you can do this seated, maybe with your hips elevated, or you can even do in a tabletop or in a standing position, whatever you like. And the first thing you'll do is just settle a little bit, feel support underneath your hips, feel support underneath your legs. Bring the shoulders over the hips and the head in line with the spine. And settle into that feeling of support and stability, both underneath your body and within your body. Maybe feeling a little bit of a lift that comes up through the whole center of the body, up through the crown of the head. And then begin to sway or circle in a way that feels good to you. So maybe you're just shifting your weight side to side. Maybe you start to circle your torso or circle your hips. And you're breathing naturally. Maybe the breath starts to slow. And just invite that sense of fluidity, invite that sense of flow, feeling the body, how it kind of dynamically works against itself and works with itself. Adding in arm movement and head movement if you want, or if your body leads you to. Inviting in that sense of exploration, almost as if you've never felt the body before. Asking the body what might feel good in this moment. And as you are ready, take a few more breaths to kind of sway and circle and wiggle your way back to neutral. Maybe if you're on your hands and knees, coming into a child's pose, or maybe coming back to a neutral seat. And keeping your breath at a slow, comfortable pace. Begin to imagine, as you inhale, the breath traveling all the way from the crown of the head down into the hips and legs. And as you exhale, imagine the breath traveling back up through the crown of the head. Inhale, drawing breath down through the whole body into the hips and the legs. And exhaling, sending that breath all the way back up through the body, through the crown of the head. And then maybe if you are comfortable, begin to focus in more on the pelvis, on the pelvic floor. Maybe inhaling directly into the lowest part of your abdomen. Inhaling, drawing breath down. And now exhaling, allowing it to settle in the pelvis, settle in the hips. As you inhale, a sense of drawing in new energy, new vitality. As you exhale, a sense of security or comfort. So that each breath is both invigorating and calming or soothing. And allowing whatever sensations, whatever emotions or thoughts you experience to come and go, to flow with the breath. And then allow your awareness to settle completely in this pelvic area, releasing focused awareness on the breath and just feeling into this deep part of your body, this deep personal internal space. Allowing your attention to linger here. Perhaps even inviting a sense of contentment or a sense of love that settles down deep here. And when you're ready, very slowly start to bring your awareness out into the body. Maybe moving again, maybe breathing deeply or sighing deeply. When you're ready, transitioning out, bringing your awareness back into your external space. And noticing how you feel, noticing your relation to yourself and your relation to your external space.
Thank you for that delicious practice. That was so yummy.
Good. Yeah, that's I so much now. I call myself like a little relaxation fairy sometimes. And a lot of it I think is centered in just being comfortable with oneself and being uncomfortable or being comfortable with places that maybe were previously uncomfortable or unfamiliar.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of the golden womb. Mm-hmm. And this is like I do the meditation sometimes with my students and do this kind of similar flow work of the pelvic area. And you imagine the elements of earth, water, and fire mixing together. So those energies, And just imagine that from the belly to the pelvic floor, and it's just like, and anything is possible from this area, you know, once you
such a primal area, and it's such a, you know, just like, you know, all those like low baser needs, but also like they're so important.
They're essential. They're essential. If you want the rest, if you want that transcendence, we also have to just be in reality first and ground
absolutely. And like it's one of those kinds of practices help me to remember that like I have a body that has its own functions and its own needs, and I'm not just my brain walking around using my body to accomplish things. And so like kind of it's almost like if you give your body that time to like just experience itself and like address those kind of baser primal needs, it will like allow you to do everything else you need to do in your day. But also it helps me to kind of just enjoy the body that I'm embodying, and work with it.
And then it stays healthy by itself.
Right. And again, thinking about the reproductive health being, you know, kind of that lowest priority for your body, if you make it a priority, you start to recognize all the other things that maybe need addressing, or it just helps you to find that nice homeostasis where if the reproductive system is healthy, that probably means that everything else is doing pretty good too.
Totally. If that's healthy, then definitely your stress is not high. That's for sure. But like you were just saying, I think that's an important point, where when you're looking after this reproductive area, you also have that stability and that certainty that nourishes everything else and makes life so much easier, because you have that grounded, rooted, embodied experience, and from that to meet life is so much easier.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for all your wisdom and work and your words. Really wonderful. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for your lovely daughter. What's her name?
This is Fox Evelyn.
Fox. Wow, I'm jealous of your name. Fox Evelyn. Wow, so nice.
Yes, thank you for your patience. She's been sitting with me the whole time. You may have heard her occasionally, those who are listening.
She was very patient.
She wanted to be with Mama today, and she did the practice with us a little bit. She was sitting on my lap doing her little rocking side to side and doing her breathing. So hopefully I'm raising a good little one who is comfortable with her body and loves herself. But yes, this has been a pleasure for me. I feel like we just barely got to talk a little bit, even though it's been a while. So thank you.
Time flies when you're having fun.
But I'd love to come back, or I'd love to introduce you to my business partner as well, because her experience and her teaching is so different from mine.
Yes. Let her know she's most welcome. I'd love to have her on. And you're also most welcome to come on another time. No worries.
Okay.
Because I want to eventually turn this podcast into more women's issues and talk about that, because that is underrated, underestimated. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you want to say any last things? Anything you want to leave listeners with, that they can find you easily? I put everything in the show notes anyway, so
just know I'm have both like my personal work that I do, and then I have my work that I do with my school. So you can find me either at Lauren Mason Yoga or Unbound Collective. And I'm just happy to be a part of community and part of working towards all this together, and knowing that there are so many different ways that we can use yoga therapy and so many different, populations that we can meet. So I'm just encouraging again the idea of diversity leads to stronger community, and having our different areas of focus means that we can serve more people more specifically. So I'm interested in learning more and being part of understanding how we're all working on these different approaches.
Using the same medium.
Yes, exactly. I love how we can all be unique and yet unified at the same time. It's just beautiful to me.
I think we have to remember that. That's a good nugget of wisdom. Okay.
That's Tantra yoga 100%.
Yeah, Tantra. Just for people who don't know, Tantra means to weave together many different elements, isn't it?
Yes, and you need all the unique colors in order to, weave the tapestry. And everyone's unique perspective is useful.
Essential.
Yeah. Mythology is a huge part of it, and one of the reasons is when you hear a story, you're actually every single character in the story. So each character's perspective is something that we can learn from.
Yes, totally. Okay, we'll say goodbye to listeners. Thank you, listeners, for staying to the end. You're all amazing, and I love the feedback. Goodbye, Fox. Evelyn, thank you for being here. Thank you, Lauren. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.